So this lecture is going to focus on things that may not have been covered adequately in the crash course videos. So with epithelial tissues, remember you have this basement membrane that the epithelial tissues are attached to because they're on surfaces, but the free surface may be specialized to reflect the function of the particular organ that they lie within. For example, microvilli will be a bunch of small finger-like projections on the surface of each individual cell that increase the surface area for absorption, and you'll tend to find these in the epithelial cells of the small intestine. Or they may have cilia on the surface, which are little finger-like projections, slightly different than microvilli, that tend to wave in one direction and will move mucus in a single direction. So in the airways, for example, the mucus can be spit out or swallowed. And so that leads us into talking about specialized epithelial cells that are glands. And the type of gland can be either unicellular, meaning one cell, or multicellular. And the best example, and probably the only example I can think of at the moment that is unicellular, are goblet cells that you'll often see associated with ciliated epithelial cells. And these goblet cells will secrete mucus to the surface of the epithelial cells so that it will trap debris, and those cilia cells will then move the mucus plus the debris to an area where they can be gotten rid of easily. But the majority of your glands will be multicellular, and they're divided into specific types. There are your alveolar or acinar type glands, and you notice that the glands, again, multicellular, but they have this shape like the alveoli in the lungs, and we'll discuss that more when we get to respiratory, but you should probably remember that from undergrad A&P classes, that alveoli have this grape-like cluster appearance, and that's how these glands will appear as well. That's why they're called alveolar or acinar. Other types of glands are simple tubular, so it is in the shape of a tube or various types of tubes where things are secreted and they move through the tube to the surface. And there you see, you'll see tubular glands in the intestines, sweat glands, and various other digestive glands as well. And finally, you'll have your compound glands, which can either be compound alveolar. Notice that there are multiple grape-like clusters here. Typically you'll find those in mammary glands. Or a mixture of tubular plus alveolar, which you'll find in salivary glands and some in respiratory passage. Or compound tubular, in other words, multiple types of tubular glands, which can be found in the bulbourethral glands in the male reproductive system, in the testes, and even some mucus glands. So not all mucus glands are strictly goblet cells, unicellular, but some of them are compound tubular glands that you can find in the mouth, where you need to produce large amounts of mucus. Now, other than shape of the gland, glands can also be classified according to what they secrete, not the specific things they secrete like milk or oil, but what is it that makes up that milk or oil. So the first type is merocrine secretion, where the glands will secrete strictly a fluid substance. And remember from a previous lecture that fluid is water plus the stuff that's dissolved in it. So literally, exocytosis, it will be the secretions from the gland. The second is apocrine secretion, where a part of the cell will literally pinch off, and that will go out with the fluids that are in the secretion. And then finally, holocrine secretion, where, as shown here, an entire cell will mature, die off, and become the actual secretory product. Now, all of these, you have to figure that even though they're solutes, parts of cells, and whole cells, they will be part of an aqueous solution that reaches the surface of the gland. Now, some other broad categories of secretion are endocrine secretion, which is endo meaning inside. So that's basically hormones secreting their products into the bloodstream to have an effect inside the body. So the example given here, pituitary glands, or any glands in your body, hormone secreting glands. Or exocrine secretion, exo meaning outside. So these are cells that will, or glandular epithelium that will secrete substances that go into tubes or acini and get secreted to the surface of things where they leave the body. So here you'd see a sweat gland, and the secretion is leaving the body through the surface of the skin. Or if you're talking about pancreatic secretions or digestive secretions, they exit the body through the intestines with your excrement. Other types of secretion include paracrine secretion, where a product will be released by one cell and will act locally on another cell. And examples of these would be prostaglandins, being released by cells that will go to neighboring blood vessels and cause them to vasodilate and the capillaries to become more permeable, for example. And autocrine secretion, where a cell will secrete a substance and then that substance will go back, bind to a receptor on that same cell. It could also bind to receptors on other cells as well, and activate that cell. And you'll see this a lot in immune responses, where a single cell will tend to auto-regulate itself through autocrine secretion.